The road into Oakhaven was a threadbare ribbon, unraveling itself between skeletal oaks that clawed at the bruised sky. I had driven this path 1,000 times in my youth, but memory had gilded it with warmth, a trick of a mind too eager to forget the bitter undertones. Now, in the stark reality of the present, the air itself seemed to thicken, pressing against the windshield, a palpable weight. My grandmother's passing, sudden and shrouded in a terse call from a distant relative I barely remembered, had pulled me back to this place I'd sworn to abandon. Her death, they said, was natural, peaceful. The tremor in the caller's voice, however, suggested otherwise, a subtle discord in the symphony of grief. The town sign, weathered and leaning, announced Oakhaven, its painted letters faded like an old photograph. Beyond it, the landscape stretched, familiar yet alien. The houses, once vibrant with the echoes of family and community, now stood hushed, their windows like vacant eyes. A profound stillness had settled over everything. A quiet so deep it felt less like an absence of sound and more like a presence, a watchful, holding breath. It was early afternoon, the sun a pale disk behind a gauze of cloud, yet the streets were deserted. No children's laughter, no distant hum of lawnmowers, no chattering voices from porches, just the whisper of the wind through the tall, dry grass and the low thrum of my own engine, which now seemed an intrusion, a rude awakening in a sleeping world. I parked my car near the old market square, the gravel crunching loudly under the tires, a sound that seemed to reverberate unnaturally in the oppressive quiet. A single vehicle, a faded green pickup truck, sat forlornly outside a general store, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin. My boots on the pavement made crisp, solitary sounds. I felt an immediate, unsettling awareness, a prickling on the back of my neck, as though unseen eyes had turned, simultaneously, towards me. The general store's bell jingled weakly as I pushed open the door, a pathetic gasp in the immense quiet. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of dust and old paper. Shelves were meticulously stocked, but the order felt artificial, untouched. Behind the counter stood a woman, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her apron impeccably white. Her face, however, was a landscape of blankness. Her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, met mine, but there was no spark of recognition, no flicker of curiosity, only an unnerving calm. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat, devoid of inflection. It was the voice of a recording, perfectly modulated but lifeless. "I'm Cole," I began, feeling foolish for introducing myself. "Cole Thorne. I am here for my grandmother's funeral." A beat of silence stretched, taut and uncomfortable. Her gaze did not waver, nor did her expression soften. "The arrangements are made," she stated, as if reciting a line from a script. "At the old meeting hall, tomorrow at noon." "Yes, I know," I replied, a thread of frustration beginning to fray my composure. The town seems so quiet. Has something happened?" Her head tilted almost imperceptibly, a slow, deliberate movement. "Oakhaven is always quiet," she said, the words falling like pebbles into a deep well. "Peaceful," I swallowed, the air in my throat suddenly dry. There was no argument to be made with such an unwavering, unfeeling certainty. I bought a bottle of water, the transaction conducted in the same eerie stillness, her movements precise, robotic. As I turned to leave, I caught her reflection in a dusty mirror behind the counter. He was still watching me, her eyes empty pools reflecting nothing but the dim light. The sensation of being observed intensified, a constant pressure against my skin, as if the very walls of the store, the shelves, the dust motes in the air, were all focused on my presence. Stepping back onto the street, the sun had retreated further, deepening the gray pallor of the afternoon. I decided to walk, needing to stretch my legs to feel some semblance of control. My grandmother's house was a short distance away, but I found myself turning down an unfamiliar side street, drawn by a faint, persistent hum that vibrated just beneath the threshold of hearing. It was a low, resonant tone, like the distant drone of an enormous, unseen machine. Beyond it, through a gap in the foliage, I saw it, an abandoned swimming pool under humming lights. The structure was a colossal concrete husk, its interior a vast, empty basin, stained with algae and cracked. Overhead, a grid of industrial lights, yellowed and flickering, cast an uneven glow, their collective hum the source of the persistent vibration. The air around the pool felt heavy, charged, almost viscous. The hum was louder here, a deep, bone-vibrating sound that seemed to emanate from the very ground. I peered through the fence, my breath fogging in the cool air. The empty pool was a gaping maw, a silent testament to forgotten joy. But it was not entirely silent. My skin crawled. This wasn't the Oakhaven I remembered, not even the Oakhaven I had fled. This was something else, something profoundly wrong. something that felt ancient and patient, waiting. What had happened to this place? And what, precisely, was watching me? I knew then that my return would be more than just a funeral. It would be an unraveling. I caught her reflection in a dusty mirror behind the counter. Her face, in that warped glass, seemed to flatten further, the faint lines around her eyes erased, her gaze utterly hollow, like a well dried of its last drop. It was not just stillness, it was an absence. A peculiar chill traced itself along my spine, not from cold, but from a profound emptiness radiating from her image. I didn't wait for her to acknowledge my departure, nor did she offer one. The bell above the door remained silent as I stepped back into the muted afternoon light of Oakhaven. The old funeral home, usually a summer beacon of communal grief, felt like a forgotten cupboard. A handful of faces, vaguely familiar, were scattered among the polished pews. The undertaker, a man whose face I dimly recalled from my childhood as being perpetually creased with a kind, sad smile, now presented a smooth, almost artificial serenity. His eyes, once warm, held a strange, distant clarity. He spoke of my grandmother with a quiet reverence, his words perfectly chosen, yet utterly devoid of genuine inflection. It was as if he were reciting a script, flawless but feelingless. He mentioned her long and peaceful twilight, a phrase that snagged on my thoughts, considering the urgent, almost frantic tone of her last letter. He offered no further details, no anecdotes, just a quiet, unwavering certainty that seemed to brook no questions. After the brief, almost perfunctory service, a small gathering assembled at the community hall, a place usually bustling with shared memories and sympathetic murmurs. I moved through the room, a stranger in my own ancestral home, seeking out faces I thought I knew. Cole, is that truly you? The voice belonged to a distant cousin, a woman whose laugh once filled every family gathering. Her eyes, however, held no spark of recognition, only a polite, almost practiced interest. It is, I replied, a hopeful tremor in my voice. It's been too long, hasn't it? She nodded slowly, a slight, almost imperceptible delay in her response. Indeed, we don't often see you. Her gaze drifted past my shoulder, unfocused. I pressed on. I'm glad I could make it for Grandma. It's still so hard to believe. Do you remember when she used to bake those impossible apple pies? The ones with the lattice crust? A flicker, then nothing. She mused, her brow furrowing slightly. I believe he was more of a gardener, always tending her roses. My grandmother, a gardener? She'd struggled to keep a cactus alive. My mind reeled. No. She loved baking, especially for the town fair. She won first prize 3 years running for her apple pie. She smiled faintly, a serene, untroubled smile that didn't reach her eyes. Perhaps you are remembering someone else. Cole, our grandmother had a magnificent rose garden. I moved on, seeking out an old schoolmate, a man I'd shared countless adolescent adventures with. Mark, it's Cole. Remember the time we tried to climb the old water tower and nearly got caught by the constable? He blinked, his eyes clear but uncomprehending. The water tower? I don't recall that. I was never much for climbing, Cole. He paused, then added with a strange, rehearsed cheerfulness, I was always at the library, you know. This was impossible. Mark, the instigator of every ill-conceived dare, the boy who hated books. My memories felt solid, vibrant, yet they were being met with a placid, unwavering blankness, or worse, a gentle reframing of reality. I tried again with a neighbor who had lived next door to my grandmother for decades. Did Grandma ever talk about anything out of the ordinary before she passed? She seemed so agitated in her last letter. The neighbor tilted her head, a soft, almost imperceptible hum escaping her lips before she spoke. Agitated? Oh no. Dear Cole, your grandmother was always so content, a truly peaceful soul. She simply faded. Her eyes held a deep, unblinking calm, a natural fading like the autumn leaves. None of these people remembered her as the fiery, opinionated woman I knew. They spoke of a placid, almost generic figure, stripped of her vibrant quirks and sharp edges. It was as if a collective brush had smoothed over her unique contours, leaving behind a bland, acceptable portrait. I felt a dizzying disorientation, a profound sense of isolation. Was I the one remembering wrong? Had my own mind fabricated these vibrant details, these shared histories? The air in the hall grew heavy, pressing in on me, thick with unspoken consensus. I needed to breathe, to think, to escape the suffocating quiet of their collective amnesia. My feet carried me away from the gathering, through the hushed streets, past houses that felt more like facades than homes. I walked until the familiar architecture gave way to the town's neglected edges, where forgotten structures sagged under the weight of time. The building stood apart, a skeletal frame of corrugated metal and grimy glass. Inside, the air was cool and stagnant, carrying the faint metallic tang of decay. The overhead lights, old fluorescent tubes, cast a sickly, yellowish glow, their persistent, low hum a living presence in the stillness. The pool itself was a gaping concrete maw, stripped of its cerulean tiles, a vast, empty basin where water once shimmered. Dust motes danced in the anemic light, swirling in currents I couldn't feel. Echoes seemed to cling to the empty space, phantom splashes, children's laughter that never quite materialized. I walked to the edge, peering into the dry depths. A lone, rusty ladder clung to the side, leading to nowhere. My grandmother's frantic words returned to me, clearer than the faces of the townsfolk. They're taking the edges, Cole, smoothing everything down. Here, in this abandoned space, beneath the unsettling hum, the truth of her words began to coalesce into a terrifying shape. It wasn't just my grandmother's memories that were being rewritten. It was the town itself, a silent, insidious erasure, piece by forgotten piece. The house, once a riot of scent and color, now held its breath. Each floorboard groaned under my weight, a lament for the vibrant life that had once filled these rooms. The air was thick with the ghost of her lavender and the faint, unsettling tang of something metallic, like old coins left too long in damp earth. The townsfolk's placid recollections of her, the way their eyes had glazed over when I pressed for details of her formidable spirit, gnawed at me. My grandmother, reduced to a generic outline. It was as if a collective sieve had been dragged through Oakhaven's memory, catching the sharp edges, the unique textures, and leaving behind only a smooth, unremarkable silt. I felt it, too, a subtle resistance in my own mind, a desire to smooth over the rough truths, to accept the easy narrative. But the ache of her absence was a jagged shard in my heart, refusing to be dulled. Her study, a room I'd always associated with the scent of aged paper and fierce debate, felt particularly hollow. The mahogany desk, scarred with decades of her furious penmanship, stood sentinel in the center. I ran my fingers over its polished surface, recalling how her knuckles would rap against it in emphasis, punctuating a particularly scathing observation. I began meticulously to empty its drawers. Each item was a relic, a dried sprig of something unidentifiable. A collection of smooth river stones, a half-finished crossword puzzle with her elegant, if slightly shaky, script. Then my fingers brushed against a loose panel at the very back of the deepest drawer. It wasn't a catch or a latch, merely a section of wood that gave way under pressure, revealing a shallow cavity. Inside, nestled among a layer of yellowed felt, lay a single, leather-bound book. Not a novel, not an account book, but a journal. Its cover was worn smooth, the leather darkened with age and handling. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through me as I lifted it. This felt like the core of her legacy, the true inheritance he had left for me. I carried it to the armchair by the window where the light was best and settled in. The first few pages were dated years ago, written in her familiar, flowing hand. They spoke of Oakhaven, of daily routines, of the changing seasons. But even here, a subtle undercurrent of unease began to surface. The quiet grows, one entry read, a hush over the woods that is not peaceful, but waiting. As I turned the pages, the entries grew shorter, more abrupt. The handwriting began to fray, like a nerve exposed. The ink bled in places as if she'd gripped the pen with a desperate, sweating hand. Words were underlined, sometimes triple underlined, with a violence that shocked me. They forget. Each day, another thread unravels. Small things at first, then larger. The baker forgot his wife's favorite tea. The ferryman, the name of his own boat. My breath hitched. This was it. This was the erosion I had felt in the townsfolk. Then the symbols started appearing, scrawled in the margins, sometimes even over the words, were crude, spiraling patterns, interlocking loops, and angular glyphs that seemed to writhe on the page. They were alien, yet possessed a strange, primal familiarity, like something glimpsed in a half-forgotten dream. Dates became erratic, sometimes missing entirely, sometimes repeated. The roots run deep, Cole, deeper than the oldest stone of Oakhaven. They feed. My name, scrawled with an urgency that reached across the years, made my skin prickle. She knew I would come. She knew I would find this. Further entries spoke of the ancient hunger of Oakhaven's true foundation being not rock, but something far older, something that demands tribute. She wrote of a pact, a bargain struck by the town's founders, and of our family's burden, a guardianship that had turned into a desperate, losing battle. Her final entries were barely legible, a chaotic jumble of words and symbols. It steals not life, but self. It weaves us into its silent tapestry. Resist, Cole. Remember, do not let it take you. The journal fell from my trembling fingers, landing with a soft thud on the worn rug. My grandmother's frantic warnings, her desperate plea, resonated in the quiet air. The generic faces, the placid eyes, the half-memories. They were not merely fading, they were being consumed. And somewhere, beneath Oakhaven, beneath the very ground I stood on, an entity stirred, its ancient hum vibrating through the earth, a vast, silent consciousness waiting to assimilate all. The journal lay splayed, a testament to my grandmother's unraveling. Its thin pages, brittle with age and frantic with her final script, seemed to hum with a silent, desperate energy. Her warnings, her plea to remember, had burrowed deep, displacing the calm I had so carefully constructed. A faint rustling began, not from the pages, but from the periphery of my hearing, like dry leaves skittering across a parched pavement, or the ghost of a whispered secret just beyond comprehension. I strained, tilting my head, but it dissolved into the ambient stillness. It was nothing, I told myself, merely the echo of her words twisting through my exhausted mind. I rose, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight, a sound too loud in the sudden, sharp quiet. The air thick and heavy with an unseen presence, but my eyes, quick to follow, found only the placid, unchanging street. No movement, no breeze, only the same uniform houses, their windows like vacant eyes. It wasn't language, not truly, but a resonance, a vibration that spoke of vast, hungry emptiness. My grandmother's frantic scribblings had opened a door, and now something was stirring on the other side. I needed air, a reprieve from the suffocating stillness of the house. Stepping out, the afternoon sun felt unnaturally pale, its warmth a distant memory. As I walked, I found myself scanning the familiar streets of Oakhaven, my gaze sharper, less forgiving. The antique shop, usually presided over by the jovial shopkeeper with his perpetually flour-dusted apron, was shuttered. A closed sign hung crookedly, but there was no explanation, no back in an hour, no on holiday, just the silent, locked door. I remembered seeing him just yesterday, meticulously polishing a brass lamp in the window. Now, nothing. No one else seemed to notice the absence, the small gap in the town's tapestry. A woman pushing a pram past, her eyes placid, unseeing. A delivery driver whistled as he unloaded crates at the general store, his movements mechanical, unburdened by curiosity. Further down, the small, vibrant community garden, where an elderly gardener with gnarled hands meticulously tended his roses, lay untended. Weeds, assertive and green, had begun to reclaim the edges of the beds. The tools, usually neatly hung, were scattered, rusting slightly. No one was there. The gardener was a fixture, as much a part of Oakhaven as the ancient oaks themselves. Yet, the few townsfolk I passed offered no glance towards the neglected plot, their faces serene, their memories seemingly untroubled. My grandmother's words echoed. They forget. A just day seemed to pull me, a subtle, insistent tug, toward the outskirts of town. The structure was a skeletal ruin of concrete and rusted metal, half hidden by a thicket of tangled brambles. It was the sound of distant, trapped electricity, or something more primal, a low thrum that resonated in my bones. I pushed through the gasping thorns, the air growing cooler, heavier with each step. Inside, the light was strange, not natural daylight, nor electric bulbs, but an unearthly luminescence that pulsed from unseen sources, bathing the cavernous space in a sickly, green-tinged glow. The humming was louder now, a pervasive, low frequency that filled my chest, making my teeth ache. The pool itself, vast and empty, stretched before me. At the deepest end, where the diving board once stood like forgotten sentinels, the humming reached a crescendo. And there, laid out on the grimy concrete, was a collection of objects. Not trash, not debris, but personal effects. A faded leather wallet, its contents spilled and scattered, driver's license visible. A child's worn teddy bear, one button eye missing. A tarnished silver locket, open to reveal two blank, yellowed spaces where photographs should have been. These were not random discards. These were anchors, remnants of lives, of identities. My breath caught. The gardener, the shopkeeper, the faces in the scattered wallet. They were here, or rather, their echoes were. This was not merely an abandoned place. It was a depository. A place where the discarded remnants of Oakhaven's forgotten residents were collected, processed, perhaps consumed. The entity my grandmother had warned me about was not just erasing memories, it was erasing people. I was no longer merely investigating a mystery. I was standing at the precipice of an unimaginable horror. My feet, almost without conscious direction, carried me past the last of the houses, past the overgrown fields, to a place where the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying timber. The whispers, a soft, pervasive static in the periphery of my hearing, had drawn me here, a moth to a strange, invisible flame. Before me loomed the skeletal remains of the old mill, its silhouette jagged against the bruised twilight sky. Rust-stained corrugated iron clung precariously to the wooden frame, and shattered window panes gaped like hollow eyes, reflecting nothing but the lingering light of a dying day. The mill was far larger than I'd imagined, a sprawling complex of interconnected sheds and towers, all slouching under the weight of decades of disuse. I pushed through a sagging door, its hinges screaming a protest that echoed through the cavernous interior. Shafts of pale light pierced the gloom through holes in the roof, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air like restless spirits. Giant gears, frozen in time, stood sentinel, their teeth corroded, their purpose long forgotten. Cobwebs, thick and gray as ancient shrouds, draped every surface. My grandmother's journal pages fluttered in my mind's eye, sketches of strange, looping symbols, alongside notes about the deep language of stone. I moved deeper into the mill, my gaze sweeping over the decaying machinery, the crumbling brickwork. Each step felt heavy, as if the very air resisted my intrusion. I found them in a neglected corner, behind a pile of collapsed wooden crates, where the wall was thick with moss and a persistent dampness. They were subtle at first, obscured by layers of grime and lichen. With a determined breath, I began to clear away the debris, scraping at the ancient filth with my bare hands. Slowly, the carvings emerged. They were precisely as depicted in the journal. Intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to flow into one another, forming an unbroken narrative. Not letters, not images, but something in between, a language of pure form. Some lines depicted abstract shapes that resembled warped human figures, while others spiraled into vortexes that suggested an endless descent. One particular symbol, a series of concentric circles radiating outwards, matched a key marker in the journal. It was slightly recessed, almost an indentation. I pressed against it, then pushed. Nothing. I tried again, applying more force, leaning my full weight into the cold stone. A gust of air, stale and heavy, billowed out, carrying with it a scent I couldn't place. Metallic, yet organic, like damp clay mixed with something long buried. It was a sound that didn't just exist in the air, but within me, a silent choir singing in my skull. This was it. This was the deeper truth my grandmother had sought. What lay beyond this ancient, gnawing maw? The determination that had propelled me this far warred with a primal urge to flee, to turn back to the relative safety of the decaying mill. My hand brushed against rough-hewn stone, slimy with moisture, and there it was. The lights weren't bulbs, but rather strange, diffused sources embedded in the ceiling, casting an eerie, phosphorescent pallor over everything. The pool itself was immense, its once blue tiles cracked and stained, its depths empty and echoing. A faint, oily sheen coated the bottom, reflecting the sickly glow above. The humming, I realized, was strongest here, emanating from the lights themselves, or perhaps from something deeper, something unseen beneath the pool's dry, scarred basin. The mill's gargantuan silhouette swallowed the last sliver of twilight. Its iron gates, rusted to the color of dried blood, hung ajar, groaning faintly on ancient hinges as I pushed them wider. The wind, now a low, mournful keen, seemed to rise from the very earth beneath my boots. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp concrete, forgotten machinery, and something else, a faint, metallic sweetness that prickled the back of my throat. Their skeletal frames, draped in cobwebs like shrouds, stood silent witnesses to a long-dead industry. I navigated through the labyrinth of disused equipment, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud against the high ceilings. Each clank of my boots seemed to awaken a deeper silence. I searched for the passage the elder had hinted at, a descent into the earth. Finally, tucked away beneath a collapsing gantry, I found it. A heavy, circular hatch, camouflaged by layers of grime and fallen debris. It took all my strength to pry it open. A gush of air, cold and heavy with the smell of wet soil and something indefinably old, rose to greet me. Below, a rough-hewn tunnel, barely wide enough for my shoulders, spiraled into the absolute blackness. My breath hitched. This or that. The true plunge. I swallowed the knot of apprehension in my throat, switched on my headlamp, and began my descent. The ladder rungs were slick with condensation, the rock walls clammy beneath my fingertips. The air grew heavier, passing in on my chest, tasting of minerals and decay. The beam of my headlamp danced ahead, revealing only more rough carved stone, the tunnel narrowing, then widening, then narrowing again, as if the earth itself were breathing around me. I dropped onto a floor of packed earth, the sound of my landing swallowed instantly. The tunnel stretched on, a winding artery in the bedrock. The walls here were not merely rough. They bore marks, shallow grooves that seemed too regular to be natural, like an ancient, forgotten script etched by countless unseen hands. The path twisted and turned, a true labyrinth. I lost all sense of direction, of time. Then, a new smell began to seep into the air. A sickly sweet aroma, like overripe fruit mixed with rust, growing stronger with every step. The tunnel opened abruptly into a vast, unexpected chamber. My headlamp struggled to pierce its depths. As I stepped further, the light revealed a space so immense it stole my breath. Not fluorescent tubes, but strange, bioluminescent growths clinging to the high, arched ceiling, pulsing with a faint, greenish glow. The diving platforms stood like forgotten monuments, their concrete steps crumbling. But it was the floor of the pool that truly seized my attention, freezing the blood in my veins. Spread across the vast expanse were bones, not scattered haphazardly, but arranged in intricate, disturbing patterns. Rib cages formed concentric circles, femurs radiated outwards like spokes of a broken wheel, and skulls, countless skulls, were stacked into macabre totems that scraped against the lower reaches of the eerie, humming light. They were old, impossibly old. bleached and brittle, some fused to the concrete, others fractured into delicate filigree, and among them, smaller, stranger bones, twisted and elongated, unlike anything I had ever seen. The sickly sweet smell was overpowering here, cloying and thick. My gaze drifted to the deepest end of the pool, there where the diving well should have been. Something pulsed. It was a mass, an organic growth of impossible size, clinging to the deepest part of the basin and spreading outwards like a cancerous bloom. It resembled a grotesque, living tapestry of tangled, translucent veins and fibrous roots, all woven together into a single, breathing entity. A low, rhythmic thrum emanated from it, a sound I felt more than heard, vibrating through the soles of my boots, resonating in my bones. It was the source of the humming lights, the source of the sickening sweetness. The surface of this growth was slick, glistening, and within its translucent depths I could discern faint, shifting patterns, like memories struggling to form, then dissolving, then reforming. It pulsed, a slow, deliberate contraction and expansion, as if drawing breath, or perhaps drawing something else entirely. A profound, ancient hunger seemed to radiate from it, a silent, ravenous presence that dwarfed everything else in the chamber. This was not merely the entity's influence. This was the entity, or a part of it, undeniably real, undeniably alive, and terrifyingly vast. Inside, the air was a cold, thick breath, heavy with the scent of mildewed wood and ancient rust. Dust motes, disturbed by my intrusion, danced in the faint shafts of moonlight piercing the grimy windows high above. My breath plumed before me, a ghost in the vast, echoing space. The mill's machinery, skeletal and imposing, loomed like petrified beasts, their gears locked in a timeless silence. I moved deeper, my boots crunching on scattered debris, splintered planks, forgotten tools, what looked like desiccated remnants of grain. It pressed against my ears, making them ring, making me strain to hear what wasn't there. This place held secrets, I knew it, a history far older and more sinister than its industrial purpose suggested. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing a narrow, winding staircase, its wooden steps groaning under the lightest touch. A primal apprehension coiled in my gut, a warning to retreat, but the determination that had driven me here pushed me onward. My grandmother's cryptic end, the town's fractured minds. The answers lay beneath, I was certain. The descent was long, each step taking me further from the world above. The staircase ended abruptly in a low, arched passage carved not from brick or stone, but from the living earth itself. The walls wept with moisture, slick and glistening under my light, and a faint, rhythmic drip 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 echoed from somewhere ahead. The passage snaked, twisting and turning, until a faint, ethereal glow began to pulse in the distance. It was not the harsh, utilitarian light of a hidden generator, but something softer, more diffuse, yet intensely alien. The pool itself was immense, its cracked, emerald tiles gleaming faintly under the strange illumination. But it was not filled with water. Instead, a murky, obsidian liquid, thick as crude oil, swirled sluggishly within its depths, reflecting the pulsing light above like a shattered mirror. The lights themselves were the source of the hum, glowing orbs suspended from the cavern ceiling by unseen filaments, throbbing with a soft, bioluminescent pulse, and gathered around the perimeter of this liquid-filled basin, standing on the broken concrete, were townsfolk. The baker, his flour-dusted apron replaced by clothes streaked with subterranean grime. The old librarian, her spectacles askew, her usually sharp gaze now distant and unfocused. The shopkeeper, his perpetual scowl smoothed into an unsettling placidity. There were others too, faces I knew from passing on the street, from brief conversations, all of them standing in a loose, swaying circle. Their eyes were the most disturbing, vacant, yet somehow intensely focused on the swirling blackness in the pool. Their lips moved, but no coherent words emerged, only a soft, continuous murmur like a hive of insects. Their bodies swayed with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, a collective undulation that suggested a puppet master pulling invisible strings. This was no ordinary meeting. This was a communion. The hum intensified, a low thrum that vibrated in my chest, a compelling whisper in my mind. It was an invitation, a promise of peace, of surrendering the burden of self. A powerful, insidious pull began to tug at me, a current in the air, a resonance in the very core of my being. It wanted me to join them, to step into that circle, to let go. My own memories, sharp and distinct moments of my life, felt suddenly fragile like glass shards in a strong wind, threatening to scatter, to blur, to become part of the collective haze. The entity wasn't just beneath Oakhaven. It was Oakhaven, slowly consuming its inhabitants, not in a violent, bloody feast, but in a quiet, insidious assimilation. Their minds, their unique histories, were the sustenance feeding this vast, silent consciousness that threatened to erase the town and everything within it from existence. My breath hitched, a silent gasp trapped in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the magnetic draw, the terrifying allure of oblivion. The mill's machinery loomed, monstrous and silent, skeletal in the slivers of lunar light. But it was not the rusted gears or the vast, empty space that truly held me. It was a song without melody, a voice without words, yet it promised something ancient and profound. I felt it then, a subtle, insidious current tugging at the edges of my awareness. It wasn't a physical force, not a gust of wind or a hand on my shoulder. It was a whisper of understanding, a gentle erosion of the boundaries that defined me. My own thoughts began to feel less like my own, blending with a vast, serene chorus of quietude. Memories, sharp and distinct moments of my life. A childhood laugh, my grandmother's knowing smile, the sting of a past regret, began to soften, their edges blurring into a tranquil, undifferentiated sea. A profound, terrifying peace settled upon me, a sense of belonging to something immeasurably larger than myself. It was the lure, I knew, the insidious invitation to shed the burden of individuality, to dissolve into the collective hum. My fear, my anger, my grief, they were all becoming indistinct echoes, mere ripples on the surface of an endless, still pond. My very name, Cole, felt alien on the cusp of my dissolving thoughts. But then, a flicker, a sharp, almost painful memory of my grandmother, her eyes alight with a fierce, defiant spark even in her last, cryptic moments. Remember what you are. It was a tiny anchor, a thread of my former self snagged against the tide of assimilation. I fought it, a desperate, internal grapple. I clenched my fists, dug my nails into my palms, the sharp bite of pain a welcome jolt back to my own body. Though my mind screamed the word, a silent, furious rebellion against the encroaching stillness. I stumbled back, tripping over a loose stone, the sudden physical jarring a harsh counterpoint to the mental pull. It was enough. The spell, or whatever it was, loosened its grip. The hum receded, not entirely gone, but diminished, a distant drone rather than an engulfing presence. I could feel my pulse, frantic and alive, a testament to my singular existence. I turned, not daring to look back at the silent machinery, and scrambled through a narrow, rusting grate I had only vaguely noticed before. It led into a cramped, low-ceilinged tunnel, slick with condensation and reeking of damp earth and disuse. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to escape the suffocating embrace of that unified consciousness. I stumbled out, blinking against a diffuse, yellowish glow. The air here was cooler, drier, carrying a faint chlorine scent that seemed impossibly out of place. The tiles, once a vibrant cerulean, were now stained with mildew and grime, a patchwork of decay. The diving boards hung precariously, monuments to forgotten leaps, and the empty lifeguard's chair stood sentinel over nothing. It wasn't about blood or tearing flesh, it was about the obliteration of the self. Not death, but something far worse. Absorption. The townsfolk, their vacant eyes and fractured memories, they weren't sick. They were being assimilated, their individual sparks extinguished, their identities slowly siphoned away until only the collective remained. Oakhaven wasn't dying. It was being unmade, its unique threads woven into a grotesque tapestry of oblivion. This was the threat to everything, to every unique thought, every personal memory, every distinct soul. And my grandmother, fiercely independent and stubbornly individualistic, had known. My hand went to the worn leather satchel slung across my shoulder, feeling the reassuring weight of her research notes within. They were my only weapon, my only guide. I pulled out a thick, bound journal, its pages brittle with age. My grandmother's precise, elegant script filled the margins, annotated with diagrams and cryptic symbols. He had detailed the entity's feeding patterns, its growth, its method of connection to the town's collective unconscious. He had even hypothesized about its vulnerabilities, about what could disrupt its insidious hold. I saw it then, scrawled on a yellowed page, a diagram of the town overlaid with a web of lines converging on a central point. The anchor, he had written, the point of convergence. Sever the connection, disrupt the flow, and the tide may recede. It was a desperate gamble, a fragile hope, but it was a plan. The entity drew strength from the town's shared memories, from the very fabric of its existence. To sever that connection, to cut off its sustenance, might just break its hold. It wouldn't be easy. I closed the journal, my gaze sweeping across the decaying pool, the humming lights casting their sickly glow. I was still Cole, still me, and I would fight to stay that way. For my grandmother, for Oakhaven, for every memory yet to be erased. The true battle was not for survival, but for identity itself. It was a song without melody, a voice without words, and it promised an end to all noise. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that it was the entity's breath, its pulse, and its endless, silent hunger. My resolve hardened, brittle as old ice, yet unbreakable. I could not stand by and watch Oakhaven dissolve into this vast, quiet oblivion. The town slept, or perhaps, it merely waited. I moved through the hushed lanes, a ghost among ghosts. Lamplight spilled in pale rectangles from windows, illuminating empty rooms, or figures sitting motionless, staring into nothing. I sought out faces I knew, fragments of memory to cling to. I saw the baker, usually bustling at this hour, standing behind his counter, hands resting on the cool marble. Then his gaze drifted past me, fixed on some unseen point beyond the glass, beyond the street, beyond Oakhaven itself. The hum seemed to grow louder around him, silencing the brief flicker of recognition. Further on, near the abandoned dock, the old fisherman sat on a crate, his gnarled hands resting on a coiled rope he used to spin tales of the sea, his laughter echoing across the water. The great storm of 78, I ventured, leaning close. You swore the waves were mountains, remember? You saved the old Fae that night. For a fleeting moment, a spark ignited in the depths of his eyes, a ripple of something akin to fear, then pride. His lips parted, a faint, raspy sound escaping, almost a word, but the hum swelled, enveloping us both, a thick, invisible current. His eyes glazed over, the spark extinguished, and he slowly, deliberately, began to untangle the perfectly coiled rope, his movements precise, meaningless. Their minds were like shattered mirrors, reflecting only fragments, quickly smoothed over by the pervasive influence. There was no rallying them in their current state. They were anchors, not sails. I needed a fulcrum, a way to pry open their sealed memories. I retreated to the relative quiet of my grandmother's study, the journal now a desperate prayer in my hands. The pages were brittle, stained with age and forgotten tea spills. My grandmother's elegant script filled them, sometimes fading, sometimes pressed deep with urgency. I skimmed through cryptic entries, half-finished poems, and botanical observations, searching for the anomaly, the pattern, the key. Then my fingers brushed against a section marked with a dried, pressed sprig of rosemary, the herb of remembrance. Her words here were less descriptive, more imperative, a shadow song that could disrupt the entity's harmony. The heart of its stillness lies where the ancient waters once echoed. I read, her careful penmanship suddenly urgent, a place of cleansing, now of corruption. There, the hum is strongest, yet it holds the key to its own unraveling. The memory bell, not a thing of bronze, but of shared truth, rung in the abandoned pool, under the lights that mimic its own false sun. A focused remembrance, a flood of personal truth, can break the current. The memory bell, a ritual, not a relic, a resonant act. My grandmother had always been precise, even in her metaphors. I knew the place. It was a forgotten municipal pool, built decades ago and left to decay when the new community center opened. Its lights, powered by a failing generator, flickered with a persistent, low-frequency hum, a sound I'd always dismissed as faulty wiring. Now I understood. The lights, they weren't just background noise. They were part of the entity's network, perhaps even a manifestation of its presence. If I could disrupt that, perhaps I could disrupt it. I left the study, the journal tucked securely inside my jacket. My destination was only a few blocks away, but the journey felt like traversing an alien landscape. The building housing the abandoned swimming pool stood isolated, a hulking concrete shell against the bruised twilight sky. As I approached, the low, rhythmic thrum became a palpable vibration, a deep resonance that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth beneath my feet. The humming lights within cast a sickly, yellowish glow through the grimy windows like the eyes of some colossal, blind creature. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of stagnant water and something else, something metallic and strangely sweet, like old blood and forgotten dreams. I pushed open the heavy, rusted door. It groaned, a sound swallowed almost immediately by the overwhelming hum. Inside, the cavernous space stretched before me, dominated by the empty basin of the pool. The air was thick with the entity's presence, an invisible weight pressing down, seeking to smooth away thought to quiet the tumultuous beating of my heart. This was where the entity sang its quietest, most persuasive lullaby. This was where I had to sing my own. The few remaining fluorescent tubes above flickered with a tired, jaundiced glow painting long, skeletal shadows across the empty basin. My footsteps echoed, each sound too loud in the oppressive quiet, a stark counterpoint to the low, almost imperceptible hum that now seemed to emanate from the very concrete beneath my worn boots. This was it, the resonant act. I moved with a purpose that felt both borrowed and entirely my own, my grandmother's cryptic messages now crystalline in my mind. The old pool, a forgotten municipal relic, had always been a place of quiet decay, but tonight it throbbed with an unseen pulse. Along the deepest end, where the diving board once soared, a section of the tiled wall was subtly different, not cracked, not crumbling, but warped as if the very stone had softened and then hardened again into an imperfect mimicry of its original form. My fingers traced the seam, finding the faint outline of a door, or perhaps a hidden passage. It wasn't a conventional entrance. There was no handle, no hinge. Instead, a peculiar indentation, smooth and cool, awaited my touch. A low, grinding groan, like tectonic plates shifting, began to resonate from within the wall. The warped section slid inward with agonizing slowness, revealing not a tunnel, but a descent into absolute blackness. I hesitated only a moment, the unknown beckoning with a terrible gravity. The passage was steep, a rough-hewn tunnel of earth and stone, feeling less like construction and more like a wound in the world. The air grew heavier with each step, the humming now a deep, guttural thrum that vibrated through my teeth. The smell intensified, a cloying sweetness now tinged with something metallic, like old blood and damp earth. My breath hitched in my throat, each inhalation a conscious effort against the growing pressure. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, a space so immense my flashlight beam was swallowed whole, rendering it useless. Here, the light was not external but internal, an omnipresent, phosphorescent glow that pulsed from the very walls, shifting from sickly green to an unsettling violet. The cavern was alive, not with scurrying creatures or dripping water, but with a silent, organic growth that clung to every surface. It was a tapestry of interwoven tendrils, thick as my forearm, glistening with a viscous sheen. They writhed with a slow, almost imperceptible motion, like giant, subterranean roots drawing sustenance from an unseen source. And then I saw it. The core at the cavern's heart, suspended in the shimmering, pulsating light, was a mass. It defied easy description. It pulsed slow and rhythmic, like a colossal heart, but its surface was not flesh. It was a swirling vortex of indistinct shapes, like half-formed thoughts, fleeting images, and fragmented memories. I saw a child's laughter, a grandmother's stern gaze, the hurried steps of a town elder, the gleam of a familiar storefront sign. They were all there, fractured and indistinct, swirling within the mass, dissolving and reforming, a collective tapestry of Oakhaven's past and present, all being drawn into its silent, consuming maw. The entity, not a beast of tooth and claw, but a silent devourer of consciousness. It wasn't just memories it consumed. It was identity, the very essence of what made each person unique, the uniform behavior of the townsfolk, their fractured recollections. It was all here, being processed, assimilated, becoming part of this vast, silent consciousness. As I stared, a tendril, thicker than the rest, detached itself from the main mass and stretched toward me, glowing with an intensified, hypnotic light. It didn't move fast, but with an inexorable certainty. "Join us, Cole! Release the burden! You won!" A wave of images crashed into my mind. My grandmother's garden, the smell of fresh earth, the warmth of her hand. Then, just as quickly, the image fractured, dissolving into 1,000 indistinguishable particles. My own memories. It was trying to consume them, to make them part of the collective. It was seductive, this promise of peace, of shedding the weight of individual sorrow and fear. But I fought back. I clung to a single memory, sharp and defiant. The sting of salt spray on my face during a childhood trip to the coast, the roar of the ocean, the feeling of absolute freedom. I focused on the vibrant blue of the water, the gritty sand between my toes, the unique joy of that moment. It was mine. The tendril paused, its light flickering. Resistance is futile. You are alone. We are all. My head pounded, a drumbeat against the insidious invasion. My own memories flickered, threatened by the encroaching tide of Oakhaven's collective past. I saw faces I didn't recognize, felt emotions that weren't mine. The sorrow of a lost lover, the pride of a forgotten achievement. It was trying to overwhelm me, to drown my individuality in its endless ocean of consciousness. No, not alone. I was Cole. I was my grandmother's grandson. I was the one who remembered. With a defiant roar that felt torn from the depths of my soul, I pushed back. I didn't have a weapon. No physical means to destroy this thing. But I had my mind, my will, myself. I slammed my own memories, vivid and distinct, into the mental space where the entity was trying to intrude. Not fragments, but whole, complete moments. The taste of my grandmother's lemon cake. The sharp scent of pine needles after a rain. The tendril recoiled slightly, its phosphorescent glow wavering. I was disrupting it. My individual consciousness, sharp and unyielding, was a foreign body, a splinter in its vast, unified mind. I would not become another forgotten memory. It was trying to swallow me whole, to fold my singular consciousness into its vast, featureless expanse. My head pounded, a drumbeat against the insidious invasion. It was trying to consume me, to make me one with the silent multitude. The hum was no longer just the lights. It was a resonance, a vibration in my bones, the sound of 1,000 thoughts merging, a silent choir of dissolution. The water in the basin, stagnant and green-tinged, seemed to ripple with unseen currents, mirroring the turmoil within me. Above, the humming lights pulsed, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed like ghostly tendrils. My grandmother's face, etched with a sadness I never understood in life, flickered at the edge of my mind, a beacon. Then, a memory of my own, a small, chipped ceramic bird she'd given me, its wing broken, a secret shared between us. A unique, unshareable moment. I clutched at it, a drowning man grasping a fragile spar. The entity recoiled, a sudden, almost imperceptible tremor in the air. It craved the collective, the shed, the easily assimilated. My stubborn, singular memory was a discord in its silent symphony. I pushed back. With every ounce of will, I focused on that ceramic bird, on the warmth of her hand, the quiet understanding in her eyes. I remembered the taste of the wild berries we'd picked together, the rough bark of the oak in her yard, the specific scent of her lavender sachets. My memories, my asterisk memories, not Oakhaven's, not the entities. The pressure in my skull intensified. A battle waged not with fists, but with identity. The humming lights above flickered wildly, their steady drone stuttering, then rising to an unbearable shriek that tore through the air. A wave of pure, cold silence slammed into me, a vacuum where the entity's presence had been. The shriek cut off abruptly. The humming lights, still glowing, dimmed to a dull, sickly yellow, their vibration gone. The air thinned, leaving behind only the damp smell of decaying concrete and stagnant water. I fell to my knees, gasping, my mind a blank slate for a terrifying moment before my own thoughts, fragmented and fragile, began to reassert themselves. The entity was disrupted. I felt its retreat, a vast, wounded thing slithering back into the deep earth from which it had sprung. I stumbled out of the echoing chamber, my legs weak, my perception of the world skewed. The sun, though weak through the overcast sky, seemed blinding. Oakhaven was different. The pervasive, unsettling quiet that had defined it was gone, replaced by a confused cacophony. Not the vibrant sounds of a normal town, but a disjointed babble. The shopkeeper stood outside his store, staring at a display of canned goods, his brow furrowed in profound confusion. Where did these come from? He muttered, his voice raspy, unfamiliar. A younger woman, who had always moved with a somnambulistic grace, now wept openly by the town fountain, clutching a faded photograph. My child, she sobbed. I remember her face, but not her name. The nets. The collective silence was broken. Yes, but the victory was costly. The entity's retreat had not returned Oakhaven to its former self. Instead, it had left behind a town of traumatized, fractured minds. Memories had rushed back for some, but others were lost forever, leaving gaping holes, phantom limbs of the mind. People looked at each other with a desperate, questioning uncertainty, trying to piece together a shared past that was now irrevocably splintered. They were like broken vessels, some holding water, others cracked and empty. The town felt like a patient waking from a long coma, unable to recognize its own reflection. The air thrummed not with an insidious hum, but with the fragile, trembling energy of bewildered humanity. Oakhaven was no longer a tomb, but it was a hospital for the mind, a place of profound, collective amnesia. I had come seeking answers about my grandmother, about the town's secrets. I had found them, and in doing so, had opened a wound that might never truly heal. The choice settled upon me with the weight of a granite slab. Or I could stay. I could try to help them, these fractured souls, to piece together the shards of their lives, to rebuild a community from the wreckage of forgotten pasts. The wind rustled through the dying leaves of the ancient oaks, a sigh that seemed to carry both the memory of what was lost and the faint, hesitant promise of what might yet be. The decision hung heavy in the air, a silent question waiting for my answer, a stark divide in the path before me.